Powered by the Inside the Birds podcast. Now, live from inside the Matt Black Kia Studios, it's Football at 4.
And Football at 4 is powered by the Inside the Birds podcast. And today, of course, we are live at Garden State Brewery in Galloway on the White Horse Pike. Now, I know a man who likes a nice cold beer, and that's Andrew DiCecco. He would be very impressed with the lineup of beers here today on this happy hour Friday. So Andrew DiCecco joins us right now as we get you ready for Eagles Saturday. That's the final preseason tune-up, and we know Andrew will have his eyes on a bunch this weekend for Philadelphia as they get ready to take on the Dolphins. And this is kind of one of those games, Andrew, where, by the way, two questions before we get to the Eagles. One, are you a Rammstein fan?
Not really. I like the song Du Hast. That was pretty popular when I was in college, just for, just the chaotic nature of it, but not so much.
Oh, I know that you got a little bit of metal in your background. I don't know if that's a little too heavy for you. I know they're playing Lincoln Financial Field. I was a little surprised to see them playing at a venue of that size.
Yeah, as I've gotten older, I've gotten a little bit more mellow. I would say Metallica is definitely in my realm. I like Megadeth, Iron Maiden, but I tend to lean towards the 80s hard rock pretty much.
Yeah, well, and by the way, we're at Garden State Brewery. They got a selection that you would be envying here. They got 16 different great beers on tap, so I'm sure you're pretty jealous that we're here and you're doing the conversation via the phone today. But let's get into what you're watching this weekend. I know that this is one of those matchups where the starters likely will not play a lot. But which of these guys will you be keeping your eye on that still have a shot to kind of make this roster and carve out a niche and a role?
Well, I was really interested to see Josh Jobe really solidify and put his stamp on that roster spot, which he was really working towards. Now, he does have an elbow injury that he's working through. It's not to say he won't play, but it doesn't seem as likely that he will. I'll be looking at a guy like Deion Kane and a receiver like Britton Covey, who has had a lot of buzz throughout most of the training camp, but really tailed off in the latter stages of camp. And looking at a guy like Jack Anderson, who has center guard versatility, and a guy like Reed Blankenship, the safety, who has a little bit of an outside shot to make the roster, but I think the Eagles really like what they have in him. So there are a couple of guys there that are on the bubble squarely that have an opportunity to either crack the roster or definitely get a practice squad spot with the potential to get the weekly protections and maybe get a call up throughout the week. So they do have a lot of guys that I'll be keying on Saturday.
Let's look at Deion Kane. Tell the listeners a little bit about what he brings. Mosher and I were talking about him earlier, and Mosher's comment kind of was, if he makes the team, what is he really doing? How much playing time would he get? I've been impressed. You see a lot of these guys that have been preseason receivers that really stand out. Your Paul Turners and your Hank Baskets. We know the list of guys who have been kind of training camp darlings. But Kane has made tough catches. He's gone up over defenders. He has shown concentration. He's a guy who caught the ball, kept his feet in on the sideline. So what do you think Kane's, if you are an advocate for him making the team, why would you keep him on the roster?
Well, it's going to be tough for Deion Kane to make it. Do I think he deserves to make it? It's going to be hard to crack that rotation in a crowded Eagles receiving core. That said, I do think that he deserves to be on a 53-man roster somewhere in the NFL. I think he can play on Sundays. I think you saw some of his ability to work through contact, come up with contested catches. I think he has good size at 6'2", 200 pounds. He's physical, fluid, and a good route runner. He just hasn't had the greatest of luck staying healthy, which is why he's bounced around to the Colts, to the Steelers, to the Ravens, and now here in Philadelphia. But he's an interesting player, and actually out of all the receivers that the Eagles have in the preseason, he's led them in special team snaps, which is interesting. He's not necessarily a third phase standout type of player, which is what he would have to do in order to crack the roster here. But I think it's interesting to see that they're trying to work him in that phase and see what he's able to do. But he does have a little bit of an uphill battle. But I do think from a receiver standpoint, he's head and shoulders above someone like a Britton Covey, who I mentioned earlier at the top of our conversation.
And that's exactly who I was going to ask you about, Andrew. Andrew DiCecco's with us for Football at 4. This is Pete T, by the way. And you mentioned Britton Covey. There was a lot of buzz around him. I'm good, thanks. Happy Friday to you. A lot of buzz around him in the beginning, and he sort of disappeared. But a game like this could be somewhere where Covey might flash.
Yeah, Pete, he's an interesting player because you really love his short area quickness and the dimension that he's able to provide as from a punt return standpoint. But as a receiver, where does he fit in, right? I mean, he ideally would be a slot guy, but hasn't really been able to conjure much of any sort of consistency in the preseason. I think he's had 4 targets, 1 catch for 5 yards. Hasn't done much in terms of punt return. He returned 2 kicks for, 47, 48 yards. So he hasn't really popped like many anticipated, including myself, as much as we thought he would. And he's a classic example of some of those guys that become – some are standouts, but they don't. You see it in ebbs and flows. I'll look for consistency. Can he maintain that momentum throughout the summer? A lot of guys will eventually tail off, and you sort of see what they are. I think the Eagles really like him, although I don't know you can say that he's one of the 53 best players on the roster right now based on what we've seen. And I think you can kind of comfortably get him through waivers at this point, even if he pops in this last game. I just think that given his size, his age, and just the lack of production that we've seen in the preseason, I think you can kind of get him onto your practice squad, develop him, call him up as needed, and sort of go from there. But I think when you look at him and you look at a guy like Deon Cain is clearly head and shoulders a better receiver and could probably contribute in covering kicks and things of that nature. I just don't know what the Eagles would do from a return game standpoint if Covey isn't on the roster.
Hey, Andrew, would you right now place Reagor as your return man, or would you like to see somebody else do that?
Well, and that's a position, Mike, that I could see the Eagles scouring the waiver wire for when final cuts are sort of when they're coming through. I don't know that they're totally comfortable with Jalen Reagor doing that. That said, Jalen Reagor is more athletic and gives you a lot more upside than either of the 2 players we mentioned in Deon Cain and Britton Covey, and they're not just going to give Jalen Reagor away. Now, if he's on the roster and he's going to be dressing on game day, he's your 5th receiver, but he's going to have to be your return. That's really all he's really going to be able to contribute if he makes the roster. So I think that the Eagles would have no choice but to be comfortable with that. But I do think that they're going to look for maybe a player that you can get, maybe a depth corner or someone that's going to provide added value. They could also return kicks and punts because I think that they want to be able to have that versatility because we've seen Jalen Reagor do it before. He just hasn't looked overly comfortable doing it, and it really hasn't really taken shape, in this thus far in his NFL career. So I don't know if it's going to really come to fruition as him being this explosive return that he was at TCU.
Andrew DiCecco with us. Now, Andrew, Mike and I have talked a lot about Jalen Hurts and what kind of performance he might be able to have this season and, all the weapons that he's loaded up with. We talked in the first hour of the show a lot about how A.J. Brown elevates all the other guys like Devontae Smith, guys like Dallas Goedert. And that brings me to the tight end position because Dallas Goedert, that's a known entity. Jack Stoll we know a little bit about, but we may see a guy tomorrow night who we haven't seen at all during training camp, and that's Grant Calcaterra.
Yeah, he's an interesting player, Pete, because obviously he was a 6th-round pick. I think if the Eagles are going to give Grant every chance to earn his 53-man roster. Noah Togiai, who I wrote about on InsideTheBirds.com, to his credit, he's really maximized his opportunities, but I think if the Eagles had their choice, they're going to keep Grant Calcaterra based on just their investment in the player. And in terms of upside, I think you get a lot more in terms of athleticism, natural pass catcher. He can really work the intermediary routes, and I think in time, Pete, he can overtake Jack Stoll as the number 2 because he just offers immensely more upside. He does have some injury concerns. We've outlined the concussion issue that dates back to his time in college, but I think when you look at what he brings from a skill set standpoint and the upside, I think you have to like what he can bring. And we know how young quarterbacks are overly reliant on the tight ends in the preseason, looking for the outlet and for the passes over the middle. So I think that you're going to see a lot of targets come his way on Saturday.
We're talking with Andrew DiCecco, of course, Football at 4. These are some guys that he's looking at. And then, if they were to make the team, how they would fit in. And I guess Tay Gowan is a guy that you mentioned, and that whole secondary, Andrew. I guess what we're watching, you mentioned Josh Jobe. They got to have a couple guys. How many of those guys are going to make the team? So how many guys not named Blankenship, Bradbury, Slay, and Maddox, and I guess McPherson, how many of those other guys are going to make this roster? So those level of guys that you're watching on Saturday.
Yeah, that's going to be my primary objective, is to kind of come away with some sort of a concrete understanding of where I think the Eagles are going to go in terms of deciding who's going to get that last spot. McPherson's going to be safe because he was a fourth-round pick last season, and he's a terrific gunner. But when I look at the fifth spot, Job had the upper hand, but now he's sidelined, and you don't know what his status is going to be like for tomorrow. So then you look at it, does that open the door for a guy like a Tay Gowan, who they did trade for and got in that Zach Ertz deal? He does have terrific size. He's 6'1", 186. I think he could stand to get a little bit stronger and develop his play strength. But I think that when you look at what he brings, you're not going to find a corner with better size and length outside of James Bradbury on the roster right now. He does have a little bit of NFL experience. He's 24, and he's just as old as Josh Jobe. And he's also done. I thought he held up well on special teams, which would have to be his calling card if he makes the roster. That's his pathway into dressing on game day. So I think he's a guy that has an opportunity here to really make the most of his snaps and maybe convince the coaches to lean a certain way. I mean, you also have a guy like Mac McCain, who's been off and on the roster, but the Eagles obviously like him. And he has a totally different body type, totally different skill set. So it's going to be really interesting to see how this shakes out. I have to think that Tay Gowan is going to see the lion's share of the snaps on the perimeter there. So we'll see what he's able to do. I anticipate him getting targeted quite a bit, so he'll have some opportunities to make plays on the football.
Andrew DiCecco with us, talking Eagles football, Eagles and Dolphins tomorrow for the final preseason affair. You know, Andrew, we're here at Garden State Beer Company for the big Eagles Friday, sort of happy hour Friday show, and Hollis Thomas is with us, who was an undrafted guy who went on to have a big career in the NFL. Well, Reed Blankenship is undrafted, yet the Eagles seem pretty high on him. What's your assessment of Reed Blankenship so far?
Yeah, well, Reed Blankenship is a player who obviously he continues to make the Eagles look smart for giving him these opportunities. He's had a lot of second-team reps throughout the summer. He's a big body guy, not overly athletic. He goes about 6'2", 200 pounds, physical. He's a hitter. He flows to the football. He's instinctive. So what he lacks in athleticism, he makes up for with his football acumen. I mentioned that about Marcus Epps as well, except Marcus Epps has a little bit more athleticism and coverage and range to his skill set. But I think Blankenship, again, he's a player that the Eagles like. I don't know that you can definitively say he's one of the best top 53 players right now that they're going to be choosing from. I think he's another classic practice squad candidate that could also see a couple games here and there on special teams, kind of like an Elijah Riley, I guess you could say last year and the year before, somebody like that. But I think that he's a developmental type of player. I don't think he's ready for Sundays just yet, but I think the Eagles are sort of enamored with what they have there. And I think in time, when he refines his skill set on the practice squad and becomes a more complete, well-rounded safety, he could find his way on the active roster and make the team and make a serious run next summer.
Yeah, those are some of the guys that Andrew's looking at. And then, of course, you have at that safety spot, Reed Blankenship, Pete asked about. But, you got Tart, who's a veteran. You've got Harris, who's a veteran. You've got Marcus Epps, who they've repeatedly said he's kind of the leader of that safety spot. But would you be surprised, Andrew, if they didn't go outside the organization and bring another safety in here?
I would be very surprised if they did not address that group. I mean, when you have a guy out there in, let's say, a Chuck Clark with the Ravens, who has 46 NFL starts under his belt, a lot of NFL experience, and would right away become the Eagles' best safety. And, I mean, it behooves the Eagles to go that route and find some way to bring some more talent into that position. I haven't been overly impressed with Jaquiski Tart. That said, he's still learning a new system, but he's a guy that, as your third safety, in all likelihood, is going to have to be depended on to accumulate some snaps and and get out there and be able to execute what they're asking him to do pretty early on. So I don't know that there's going to be a whole lot of an opportunity to sort of learn on the job, so to speak. So I think this is a big game for a veteran like Jaquiski Tartt. So yeah, I do think that they will and they need to add to that position in a big way.
All right. Obviously, on the offensive side of the ball, you're not going to see Jalen Hurts. You might see a little bit of Minshew, I guess, but not that Carson Strong would make a big impact this season. But is it telling you he was a guy that a lot of people liked at the draft, and when they got him, are you kind of reading that he? I don't want to say has disappointed the team, but is just not ready for this level right now?
Yeah, he's just not ready, and I'm not buying that they're trying to hide him, because I was at the training camp practice and he didn't take a single snap. You don't hide a player in practice, right? So I just don't think that they wanted to afford any of those precious snaps to a player who just really isn't ready and doesn't figure into their immediate plans, right? I think that knowing what they have a project guy, and there's not going to be teams swooning to bring him in and add him to their 53-man roster. So you're going to see a lot of him, I anticipate, tomorrow, and he really needs the snaps. But I think that a year on the practice squad, and who knows, they may not even deem him practice squad worthy, because it's a vital every spot on the practice squad. You have to envision them being able to be called up at a moment's notice, for the most part. And he's so far away from being Sunday ready or being somebody that's rosterable that I think that he could be a guy that you see them bring in October or November and continue to nurture his skill set and bring him back next summer, and hopefully you're getting the player that you envisioned when you initially signed him, because they did offer him a lot of guaranteed money as an undrafted free agent, so they obviously liked what they saw. It's just sometimes different players, and Hollis can attest to this, they just adjust to the game at different speeds, and sometimes it takes a while for the light to come on, and right now he's so far away from being Sunday ready. So we'll have to see how that goes. But, in terms of Reed Sinnett and Carson Strong, Reed Sinnett's another guy head and shoulders above him right now. That said, I don't think Reed Sinnett makes the 53-man roster either.
Here's one for you, Andrew. In the Jets preseason game, the Eagles came out very vertical and did a lot of the passing, and obviously Hurts was perfect and had the perfect passer rating. And then in the Browns game, it was run the ball, run it the whole way. So was there anything in these open practices this week that gives you any idea of what their strategy is going to be or what we're going to see early on against the Dolphins?
I think every coach's mentality in this final preseason game is get out of this game with the least amount of injuries as possible, run the football. These games are very sloppy, and there's a lot of penalties. But I think that they're going to see a lot of running the football in hopes that it shortens the game a little bit. You're going to see some guys that they're going to try and get the ball in space, and maybe a Britton Covey, and throw one deep down there to Deion Kane. Maybe see his contested catch ability in the red zone. Get Grant Calcaterra, get him involved on those intermediary routes and maybe in the red zone. But I think for the most part, it's going to be a very vanilla game plan. You're going to see a lot of Kennedy Brooks. You're probably going to see a lot of Boston Scott as well. And it's going to be that ground and pound approach, and that's kind of the way I envision it shaking out.
Yeah. All right, football at 4 here with Andrew DiCecco, InsideTheBirds.com. Check out his coverage of the Eagles and the guys he's watching for in the matchup on Saturday against the Dolphins. You can hear that game right here on 97.3 ESPN. And, of course, Andrew will be with us on Football at 4 all season long, getting us ready for a highly anticipated Eagles season. So, Andrew, appreciate the time as always, pal, and we'll catch up with you next week.
Absolutely, guys. Have a great weekend.